All right, so we'll get started. This will be our last formal class. Monday's class is going to be is optional, and it'll just be a review. So if you don't feel like coming, you don't have to come. But it will be open review, so that would actually be a good time. If you do some work over the weekend, start looking at the tests. If you're looking at it and you're like, oh, that doesn't look like we learned that, bring the test, and I will say, no, that's not on the test. So that can offer that. I do owe you some homework to go with this chapter that I've not done yet. So I'll have that done hopefully by Saturday so you can play with it. Yeah, so there's that. I'll make it optional. Yeah, I will just what I will do is I'll make it 0 points, but it'll be for you to study. Okay, how's that? So if you don't want to do the homework, that's fine, but it'll probably hurt you if it'll probably hurt you if you don't do the homework. Chapter 20. So, yeah. There should be. Are there anything to it might be called exam 3. Okay, then that, yeah, because I've changed the name to practice. Okay. Trying to think. So I was teaching this. Was it the first time? They may all be online because the first time I taught this was the first time that I returned to teaching this was 21, I think. And that's when, or 20, it was spring of 20, which was, as we all know, got interrupted. So that's probably online. So there's probably, yeah. So but it'll be the material. So, I don't know, not sure. Yes.
Also, I was looking on and there's reviews, so you must have done platforms or something, but
yeah.
The videos are no longer available.
Oh. All right. Is dead. The links are bad. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'll see what I can do over the weekend to give you some more stuff. So if I were you studying for this exam, the thing that I would really look at is the homework that I've built for you this semester so far, right? So what I try to do with the homework is I try to go through and build an exam, at least one example of every possible problem I could give you on the exam. No, it's not cumulative. So it'll be, what are we doing? Chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, I think is what it'll be. 12, 13, 14, 15, 20.
12, 13, 14, 15,
yeah, 12 through 15, 20. I don't think I'm going to get to 19. There's not a lot in 19, but it's a kind of it's an important topic. It's public goods, and I'd like to cover a little bit of that because you should know that going into policy. But we'll see. Okay, so I will over the weekend. I am trying to. I have a major project that I have due Friday, so I have very little flex to do anything right now through Friday. But Saturday I'll try to put some more stuff out there for you to play with, because I also still have to write a makeup exam for some of you for another class this week. So, okay. So if I were you, I would spend time with so you've already got chapters 12 through 15 homework, right? I would go through those homeworks and make sure I can do them, right, as quickly and without looking at the answer. So I would focus on that. Then I think there's some old exams out there. There should be. They're probably all Canvas based because I think that's what I wound up doing for the finals. Definitely for 2020 is because we were in the middle of COVID. Probably for 21 as well, but I'm not 100% sure. And then I didn't do it. Was it 21? God, I lose track of time. No, I did it twice. Then we had a different instructor do it last year, and so now I'm back doing it again. You do stuff too long, it just all kind of blends together, gets a little confusing. So there should be some old finals, but as we were just discussing, did not cover chapter 16, which is monopolistic competition. So that will probably be on any of the old final exams, but I'm not going to ask you about it because we didn't cover it. So you can ignore that if you come across it. All right, I want to cover this material. So the other thing is for today, for pre-prac, this doesn't cover Tina, but for everybody else, pre-prac, I don't have a full 50 minutes of material for you for pre-prac today. So what my thought is, we just take like a 2-minute stretch break between this class and pre-prac and lunch, roll in 15 minutes during what would have been your lunch break, and we'll be done and you have the rest of the afternoon off. Does that sound fair? All right. And then if any of you want to talk to me about, those of you who need to take the finance makeup, I'll hang out and we can talk finance stuff after that. Sound good? All right, let's roll into this then. So we were talking about, I'm telling you this story about, let me back up and let's refresh the story because it's really important. Kind of like what I was talking about in finance, like this is meant to help you model reality, right? So you have to understand the story that you are playing with and trying to model in order to have the numbers mean anything, right? So it's not these shapes on, this geometry is not just meant to be pushing numbers around. It's meant for you to be like, hey, there's this real situation. How could I model it, using some math, some simple math? And so that's what we're doing here, right? So the story that I was telling you is this. We've got this super simple test, right? That maybe is just like a cheek swab, right? And all it is basically all it takes is like you get a little kit, you rub your cheek, it tells you whether you're going to get cancer or something important, right? So that it's something that people want for sure, that they're willing to pay for sure, and it's super simple, and it doesn't. And here's the key piece: it doesn't really require, because it's so simple, it doesn't really require medical advice, right? So basically, anybody could administer this test. You can administer it to yourself. So it's like a pregnancy test or a self-COVID, self-test. Like you don't need anybody to do that. Like so it could conceivably be sold in a pharmacy as easily as sold in a hospital. And so the story I'm telling you, and it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but this is very much how lobbying and politics mixes with business in the real world. Right? So when we think about things like certificate of need laws that allow organizations to lobby the state to limit the amount of supply of services in a community. So for example, up until about 2015, New Hampshire had this certificate of need law that was the brainchild of the federal government back in the 70s. They came up, the federal government mandated that the states implement certificate of need laws if they wanted federal funding for building more hospitals. And the certificate of need law said, what you had to do was you had to have a committee, and people would come to the committee and make an argument. Hey, I want to get a new MRI, right? Or I want to get a new, or I want to do cardiac surgery in my hospital. And you'd have to come to the certificate of need board. And then anybody in the community could come and argue against you being able to do that. And I think that we talked about this before. Like if I wanted to put up an MRI, an imaging center here, and I had to go to the certificate of need board, and I wanted to put one in Durham, who would object to that? Well, everybody that already had an MRI, because they don't want any competition, right? So that would be Exeter, that would be Portsmouth, that would be Wentworth Douglas, maybe Frisbee. I can't remember if they've got MRIs or not. So if you have to go to it, so the politics, right, interacts with government, interacts with business, ideally as sort of an umpire, right? So I'm going to be completely honest, I'm a free market guy. I believe that the government ought to play the role of umpire and not active participant, right? So you should call balls and strikes, right? Fouls or whatever else I'm definitely not a sports guy. But the umpire should call balls and strikes. The umpire shouldn't be like getting in the way of players, because he doesn't like the Yankees. He wants the Red Sox to win. So he's going to like stop the Yankee player from getting to home base or whatever. That's not fair, right? But a certificate of need, certificate of need board, right, says you can't set up an MRI if the certificate of need board doesn't give you permission. And so it's very much in the interest of all the other incumbent players to try to convince the certificate of need board that your entry into the marketplace is wasteful competition, right? I want you to remember that phrase. And whenever you hear somebody say wasteful competition, I want you to think of Professor Bonica and him flipping the bird at those folks, right? So, because wasteful competition is usually code for I don't want anybody to compete with me because I don't want to lose my monopoly profits, right? So, how much money would Exeter Hospital, Wentworth Douglas, Portsmouth Regional be willing to spend to try to keep you from building an MRI machine in Durham, or bringing an MRI machine to Durham? Well, they'd be willing to spend whatever monopoly profits they're going to lose, right? So we're going to circle back to that in a minute. But if I stand to make $100 in excess profits, but I'm going to lose all those excess profits if you build your MRI machine, how much would I be willing to spend to keep you from bringing your MRI machine in? Well, anything less than $100 is worth it, right? I'll spend $50 to try to buy off, Brianna, who's a corrupt politician over there in, Rockingham County or whatever, to say, hey, Brianna, a little $50 towards your reelection campaign, in case you didn't feel like there was a need to have another MRI machine in the community. And Brianna's like, I've always felt that there really wasn't a need to have an MRI machine in another MRI machine, here in Stratford County when we already have a whole bunch of them. Thanks for the $50. So, and it doesn't have to be that crass, right? It's just paying for access. And that's what lobbyists do, right? So let's imagine now we've got this test, right? And it's currently the hospital is they're the only ones that have it. And so if you go to if they're the only ones that have it, and there's a legal proposal to say, this test could just be over the counter, and we could just sell it at at pharmacies. And the hospital's like, oh man, when we can control access, we get to set the price where marginal revenue, right? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? We get to set that price, and that price is $8, and we make a profit of 36. The consumers get consumer surplus of 18, right? And we limit supply to 12. If this new law passes and says, these tests, they don't really need to be done in a hospital, that anybody can just do it safe, right? All you're doing is swabbing the inside of your cheek. It's not like there's like how are you going to injure yourself with that? I mean, unless you somehow jam it up your, I don't know. I just can't really fathom how you would injure yourself. And so why do you need medical supervision to do that? And this kind of goes with 23andMe, right? How many of you guys have done like a 23andMe or Ancestry.com? Like a lot of you probably have. Well, those folks can take your swab and not only tell you, you're 10% Irish and 20%, Portuguese and 5% Cro-Magnon and whatever else. But they can also be like, hey, you've got an 87% chance of getting breast cancer. You've got a 47% chance of getting colon cancer. You've got, a 20% chance of having some other debilitating disease, and you've got a 10% chance of having children that, have this sort of birth defect. They've got all that information. They've got it all. If you've done 23andMe, the 23andMe people know all of that about you. And they're not legally allowed to tell you that, right? Because some folks have lobbied saying, hey, the only people that should be able to tell patients that information or people that information are licensed genetics counselors. Okay, so I can get all that information. 23andMe could give me all that information for $29.95 or whatever it is that costs to get the test done. They could just give that all to me. Or you could pay $2,000 or $3,000 to meet with a genetics counselor and get the same information. Which one sounds like a better deal to you? Well, I don't know about you, but I'll take the $29.95. Now, I had this argument with the guy who used to be the former, he was a health economist in our department. He retired 5 years ago. And I was like, that's complete BS. Right? Like, if I'm a grown man or, any of you, you're all over 18, if you want to know that information and 23andMe can get it to you, and the only physical risk is, some sort of crazy accident with a cheek swab, which again, you have to try really hard to hurt yourself with a cheek swab, then you ought to be able to make that decision because you are a grown person, right? Grown man, grown woman. So you ought to be able to make that decision and then get that interpretation from a genetics counselor if you so desire, right? And his response was, yeah, but some people will get like that news and it'll be like, well, you have a 27% chance of getting, cancer, and then they'll go throw themselves off a bridge. And I'm like, well, good, get rid of a couple of dumb people, right? I mean, it's like if you're that stupid, fine, and probably don't want you reproducing anyway. So, I'm just a crass free market guy. Like, I'm like, you're a grown person. You have the right to ask for that. And that information is known and you can have it. You ought to be able to have it. Now, if you're, and then if you get some bad news, it's like, oh my God, I don't even know what this, bizarro disease is that I've got a 72% chance of getting. And now it's time to go talk to your doctor, right? And then go see the geneticist before you throw yourself off the bridge. Like, be informed before you throw yourself off the bridge. Surely, if you're considering throwing yourself off the bridge, you can spend $1,000 to go meet with a genetics counselor who can tell you that doesn't really mean what you think it means, right? Or yeah, really, your life is going to suck, and then you can be informed and you can decide, do I want to live or do I want to throw myself off a bridge? But either way, regardless, you're grown human beings. You can't hurt yourself with a cheek swab, right? Now, different story if you're talking about like a pacemaker or, or something that could actually hurt you, right? If employed incorrectly. For me, that's a different line. But when this is just simply information, none of my business. But the FDA has been successfully lobbied to prevent 23andMe from providing this like almost nominal, this nominal cost information to us as consumers. And the only way you can get it is by paying a large fee to a genetics counselor or, or a physician of some sort that can then, which I find insulting, right? Like, I'm a grown man. If I want this information, I should be able to have it. I'm not asking for you to give me a drug that I could hurt myself with or hurt somebody else with. I'm not asking you to give me some sort of medical device that I could potentially hurt myself with. This is information. So that's an example where of a real thing. 23andMe, right? Pricing for 23 and, the access to that information should be down here. But in fact, access to genetic information, like what's your chance of getting breast cancer, for example, or colon cancer or prostate cancer for me and Sean, right? Is, if you want that, you have to pay a premium, a monopoly premium, rather than getting it at what should be the market price, right? So this example that I'm making up for us in class today is real. Like 23andMe is the real thing. I mean, I find this more shocking. So I'm going to talk about like this cancer, test. But you can just reframe the model I just talked about. Works for 23andMe, and the fact that 23andMe knows all about your probability of getting cancer. Oh, by the way, they're selling that information to drug companies. I don't know if you know that. So when you take the 23andMe test, they have all that information and they sell it to drug companies because what you are voluntarily doing is giving them a bunch of DNA information that drug companies are very eager to know about. They de-identify it, right? But they're like, here's the population in New Hampshire. This is the information we have about their DNA. And drug companies are happy to pay for it. So it's not like that information is just not going anywhere. It's being used. All right. So we've got this test that currently the hospital has a government imposed monopoly, right? As opposed to a natural monopoly. This is not a natural monopoly. This is a government imposed monopoly. And right now the government is saying, you can only get this test through hospitals, right? And so when that's the case, we're at the monopoly level. And so as a result, we get consumer surplus of 18, right? And then there's a deadweight loss of 18. Now, there is a move afoot. Let's imagine in our community, there's a move afoot to take away the hospital's legal monopoly and allow consumers to go buy this thing from Rite Aid down the street, right? And the hospital is like, oh man, we're going to lose 36 in profit if this goes through, right? And of course, there's the usual kind of fearful crowd of, scared of any sort of progress, scared of any sort of science, and think about like the anti-vaxxers and so forth, who think that measles vaccines cause autism, which is complete garbage. Like it's over and over again, not true. We don't know what causes autism. We don't know why there's more autism happening now in your generation than there was in my generation. But it's not measles vaccines, right? We know that. And so there's always some group of nut jobs out in the community that are afraid of it. So the hospital decides, they hear about it, this mumbling down there like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this test. And the hospital's like, you're right. The only safe place to do this test is in a hospital emergency room because you never know what might happen, with this cheap swab. So the hospital knows it's not dangerous. But they get together with this group of anti-test activists, right, to start to lobby the government to keep this as, because it's not safe, quote unquote. All right. So if we can pass this bill, if we can pass change the law, and make this a over-the-counter test, then the hospital no longer has its monopoly, which means that the test will fall as competition comes in. The test will fall to where marginal cost equals demand. And if the test falls to where marginal cost equals demand, we'll get the optimal quantity, Q social, right? The optimal social quantity. If it goes to the optimal social quantity, what would the consumer surplus be? Well, it would be the whole triangle, which we talked about last time. So I'm kind of going fast because we talked about this last time. So it'd be the height of the triangle is 11 minus 5. The width of the triangle is 24 times a half. So that gives us 11 minus 5 is 6 times 24 divided by 2, 72. So the consumer surplus, if we can eliminate this government granted monopoly, would be 72 instead of 18. So how much are consumers losing? How much are consumers losing, right, by having the monopoly in place? What is the cost to consumers if the monopoly stays in place? Well, it's the difference between what they get with the monopoly and what they get without the monopoly. So what would that be? Sean? Right, which was what? Right. 72 minus 18 equals 54. So the cost to the consumers of the monopolist keeping his monopoly is the difference between what they would get with the monopoly and what they would get without the monopoly. So with the monopoly, they only get this little tiny triangle. Without the monopoly, they get the whole triangle. So what's the cost? It's this, it's the deadweight loss plus the profit. So it's worth 54 to the consumers. How much to each consumer? Let's assume each test goes out to an individual consumer. So how much is getting rid of the monopoly worth to each consumer? So how many consumers do we have at the socially optimal quantity? 24, right? So if we have 24 consumers, 54 divided by 24 is 2.25. So the hospital stands to gain 36 in profit if they can keep the monopoly. But the consumers as a group stand to lose 54 if the hospital keeps the monopoly. But the problem is this: the consumers there's 24 consumers and one hospital. So in order for the consumers to keep the hospital from getting a monopoly, they have to convince the politicians to pass the law saying, hey, you know, this is not a thing that really needs to be done in a hospital emergency department. We want this to be able to be done, you know, at our convenience by going to Rite Aid. Well, each individual consumer only has if the hospital gets its way, each individual consumer only has a loss of 2.25. If the hospital loses, they lose 36. So who's got the biggest interest in making this arrangement stick? The hospital does, right? Caroline's like, the hospital, right? The hospital clearly, they stand to lose 36. Each of us stands to lose 2.25. Which of us is going to fight harder to keep for the law? It's the hospital, right? They stand to lose a lot. Now, here's the other thing. Okay, so here's a phrase you need to know. It goes concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. Concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. If you can understand this concept, you can understand most of politics, right? You can understand most of politics. There's almost always, when a law is being proposed, somebody stands to benefit and somebody stands to lose. That's the nature of politics. It's pretty much a win-lose game, right? Think again, like if you think of politicians or lawmakers as like umpires, which in my mind they should be, but if you think of them as umpires, think of ball players, or pick your sport, whatever it is, soccer or whatever, right? There are rules in place that if you change there are rules in place that favor certain players and disfavor other players. And if you change the rules, that changes which players are favored and which players are disfavored, right? So if you have, I don't know, so this is where I shouldn't use a sports metaphor because I don't know sports that well. But, you know, I don't know, somebody help me out. What's a rule that benefit, is it called pinch hitters or something like that? Somebody steps in and can bat for you. Designated batters, designated hitters. That's it. Designated hitters. Like, doesn't one league have designated hitters and one doesn't? No, I don't know. All right. I think that's the case. Nobody knows. All right. We're all like a room full of people that don't follow sports. The sports balls. What? Sometimes the pitcher bats and sometimes they don't, right? And I think it's league by league. So like if so there's an example, like the pitcher doesn't have to bat, so you can have somebody steps in to bat for the pitcher, keeps their arm fresh, right? Well, that favors pitchers who, that might favor, so where you have that, you now are kind of favoring pitchers, you're saving their arm. So the game is a little different in one league versus the other league, and it favors pitchers that would be harmed by batting versus pitchers that wouldn't. So if you then change that rule, it changes the dynamic of so then teams are going to be like, well, we can hire, Sam, who's, kind of got a wussy arm, but, like she, but if she has to bat, then she won't be as good, but we'll hire her in our league. But then if they change and she's great, but then they change the rules and now she has to bat and now her arm gets all floppy when she goes out to bat, to pitch the next time. And so now we fire her because she's not as good. And so that hurts Sam, right? So those changes in rules almost always hurt some people and favor some people and hurt others. Another example I've talked about in the past in this class, is why do we have so much corn syrup in our food, right? Instead of sugar, like real sugar. Why do we have so much corn syrup? Well, it's because the farm lobby argues to Congress, you need to protect us. You need to keep foreign sugar out of the United States. Sugarcane, which makes like real sugar, grows really great in places like Brazil. Mexico doesn't have, I think I've told this story, Mexico doesn't have laws blocking the import of sugar because they don't really have a competing sugar industry in their country, and so they don't bother blocking sugar. So in the United States, we have sugar beet farmers. That's the best source of sugar in the United States, and they have therefore a very powerful lobby in Florida, I think, and like South Dakota somehow. And so they argue to Congress that we shouldn't allow cane sugar, which is cheaper, much cheaper to make in Brazil. We shouldn't allow foreign imports of cane sugar. So if you go to Mexico and you buy a Coke, it'll have cane sugar in it. If you go to the store down in Hannaford and buy Coke, it's not going to have sugar in it. It's going to have corn syrup, right? Because corn syrup is cheaper than sugar because in the United States, because sugar beets are more expensive source of sugar. So the sugar you buy here in the United States probably is mostly like if you go to buy a 5-pound bag of white sugar, it's probably sugar beets. It's a much more expensive process to get sugar out of sugar beets than it is to get sugar out of sugar cane. But we charge a significant tariff, a tax, whenever Brazilian producers want to send sugar to the United States. Makes Brazilian sugar more expensive than sugar beet sugar, artificially, right? It's not an artificial sweetener. It's artificially more expensive. Maddie's not buying it. So anyway, so why do you have corn syrup in your Coke? Because sugar is artificially expensive in the United States, and it's cheaper for Coca-Cola to use corn syrup rather than real sugar. Why do we have ethanol in our gas? What's ethanol? Do you guys know? You do know you have ethanol in your gas. It's like if you go down to the Circle K, it'll say we're 10% ethanol or something like that. Where does ethanol come from? That's what it's corn. Yes, it's corn. It comes from corn. So what do? We grow a bunch of corn in the United States. Then we grind it up and ferment it, and we get, and that's where ethanol comes from. I know it comes from ethanol. Ethanol comes from corn. I don't know exactly how they get it out of the corn. We grow a whole boatload of corn in the United States, and then we put it in our gas tanks and drive around with corn in our gas tanks. Like essentially, like imagine you're shoving ears of corn in your gas tank, mixing it with your regular gasoline. It's stupid, right? It's just, but why do we do it? Because the corn farmers can make money. And so they convince the federal government, you know what we should do? You should make everybody have to have, make gas producers have to mix 10% corn into their gasoline when they make gasoline, because that'll give us money. And oh, by the way, it makes gasoline more expensive. Now, why does that get through? Because the corn farmers have a concentrated benefit. They stand to make a lot of money by selling corn for ethanol, right? More money than if they make the corn, they grow corn and they sell it to poor countries that would eat the corn, right? It's actually more profitable for them to sell, to create a law that says in the United States, 10% of your gasoline has to be made from corn, which again is really stupid, right? Because the corn farmers get a lot of money out of it, and we pay a little bit more for our gasoline. So the corn farmers make, let's say, millions of dollars a year, probably billions of dollars. Like the industry as a whole makes billions of dollars off of making ethanol, and we all pay 5 cents a gallon more at the gas tank. So the corn farmers that make ethanol, or the sugar beet farmers that grow sugar beets for sugar in the United States, have a concentrated benefit. They stand to lose a lot of money if we change the law. If we say, you know what, burning corn in our gas tanks doesn't make any freaking sense. Excuse my French. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Let's stop doing that. The corn farmers are like going to lose their minds because they're going to lose their farms. So they're going to lobby very hard to keep that ethanol rule in place. And meanwhile, the rest of us, how excited are you going to get about, like, how much effort are you going to put in to getting rid of, now that you know the truth about ethanol, that it's not as efficient as regular gas, it costs more than regular gas, but it costs you, like, over the course of a year, it costs you $20. How much effort are you going to put in to convincing your federal politicians to get rid of the ethanol rule? I mean, I'm not making this up. You can go look it up after class, go to Wikipedia, go figure out what, how much waste is involved in turning corn into gasoline, instead of using it for, sending it to countries where they don't have enough food. How much are you going to, let's say it's $20 a year to you. How many are you going to go out and write a letter to Maggie Hassan after class saying, we need to do, heard about the ethanol scam in econ class. I want you to do away with that. I haven't even done it. I'm telling you about it. I haven't even done it, right? Like, it's not worth my time. It's $20. I'm just like, I have other things to worry about, right? But it's a big deal to the corn farmers that they keep their ethanol subsidies in place. Right? So the farm bill is nothing but a bag full of goodies for the farm industry. You'll hear this every 4 years. They renew the farm bill. You'll hear about it in the news, and kind of, it probably just goes by you. But in the future, what I want you to think about is, oh, there goes my ethanol. There's my ethanol, there's my sugar beets, and there's my corn syrup and my Coke, right? Thanks, farm bill. Now, the farmers have a concentrated benefit. They stand to lose a lot of money if we change the rules. And we have a small cost. We pay, a 5-pound bag of sugar costs like $3 or something like that. It's a dirt cheap thing. How much cheaper would it be if I could buy it from a bag of sugar made with sugar cane from Brazil? I don't know, it'd be like $2, right? So I buy, how many bags of sugar do I buy in a course of a year? I don't know, 10. Like, I bake a fair amount. I make a lot of cookies and stuff. So, like, I buy maybe 10, like, I'm talking about $10. Am I going to pick up the phone and call Maggie Hassan and say, hey, do something about this farm bill? And she's going to be, who are you again? Because I've got a farm lobbyist in my office and he's writing checks to me for like $5,000. Who are you? And how much did you give to my campaign? Well, I didn't give you anything because I don't vote for Democrats. Okay, well, nice to meet you. Hang up the phone, right? So that's the reality of politics. How do you get a voice in politics? You bring money. Who brings money? People that have a concentrated interest, right? There's nothing wrong with having law. Like the Hospital Association, good friends of the department. great people, love them, but that's their job, is to argue on behalf of the interests of hospitals, right? In the state, at the state level, try to convince, the state to give the hospitals more Medicaid money, for example, and they will get up there and weep in front of you about, different things. And we are all fairly partial to the healthcare sector because, that's our sector. But if you step back for a second, you're like, all right, is this really the best way to spend the money? So lobbyists represent concentrated benefits, farm, healthcare, big pharma, the pharmacy lobby, right? There's a lobby for almost everything. There's a lobbyist for almost everything. And the problem is us taxpayers, right? Us regular consumers, we stand to lose a lot as a group, but we don't act as a group, we act as individuals. So we as a group lose, I lose $10 a year on sugar, buying sugar, raw sugar. So do you and all your families do. Or we could talk about the ethanol. We all drive cars, right? We all stand to lose $20 a year on ethanol. If we add that up, there's 20 odd of us in the class, right? Well, that's 20 times 20, that's 400, right? And then you multiply that by, 250 million people in the United States that drive gasoline powered cars. Now you're talking about a lot of money. It's a lot more than what the ethanol lobby, what the farmers get. When you do that, when you say the cost of the policy, the cost of having the ethanol policy far outweighs the benefit that the hospitals, that the farmers get from having the ethanol policy. Let's say they get $1 billion, but it costs us consumers, say $10 billion. The problem is, in order for us to stop this regulation or change this regulation or change this law, we would have to coordinate our behavior. We would have to get together. We would all have to start calling our representatives and say, this ethanol thing is BS. Stop it, right? Stop doing this. Stop taking the farm lobby's money. But we don't. So it's this, what I'm showing you here, where if the hospital gets its way, it gets 36. But if we can pass a law saying, hey, you don't get to keep your monopoly, we would collectively get 54 more, a total of 72. The problem is that we all act as individuals. We don't coordinate our behavior and argue in our favor. So instead we wind up acting like, well, I'm only losing 2.25. I'm not, is that really worth me taking the time to make the argument? So concentrated benefit, diffuse cost. That's an important idea that you need to know, both for this class and as a citizen. Now, let's imagine that it is possible for us to become informed. So first of all, you all didn't even know what ethanol, came from. Just a minute. I mean, unless you were just being quiet. I mean, I think Caroline kind of whispered it, oh, it was Hannah. Hannah got the credit. Okay, so most of you didn't, or if you did, you were shy to say it. But the average citizen doesn't have any idea. What do you mean I'm driving around with corn in my tank? So most people aren't even aware that that's a thing. Most people don't know about the fact that we could get much cheaper sugar from Brazil, but we shoot ourselves in the foot by saying, no, we're only going to get sugar. We're gonna tax the hell out of foreign sugar so that we can support the sugar beet farmers. Well, you could become informed, right? You could become informed. You could spend all day reading the newspapers, reading farm journals, paying attention to what bills are being put up on Capitol Hill. And there are people who do that, right? We call them crazy. And we call them crazy for a good reason, right? Or obsessives or whatever. Like you got some political junkies that have a pretty good idea what's going on with most stuff most days. But it's just not worth your time to do that because there's other things to be done in life, right? But let's say that you could do that. So using our numbers here, right? We're going to build a little game. And we're going to say that citizens can be informed at a cost of 5, right? Versus say the 36, right? That's the scale. So citizens can be informed at a cost of 5. So it costs you 5 to pay attention to what's going on. And that would mean that you're now aware. You would be informed enough about everything that's going on around us at a cost of 5, which would include being aware that the hospital is trying to pull a fast one on us and pretending like this test is actually dangerous when it's not, right? And then they're trying to create themselves a monopoly. And so if we're informed, then we'll go out and tell we'll tell our politicians, hey, don't do that. And let's say the hospital can lobby at a cost of 5 as well. So the hospital lobbies at a cost of 5. It costs us 5 to be informed. So now we're going to build a quick game. Us versus the hospital. Citizens versus the hospital. So citizens, hospital. And the citizens can be ignorant, which means they don't spend the 5 and they go watch sports ball games and NASCAR and stuff like that. Or they can spend 5 and be informed. The hospital can lobby on behalf of its new policy, on behalf of the this policy that they want to pass. We'll call it the what do we want to call it? I had a clever name for it. Let's just call it the safe test law or something like that. Some BS. So they can lobby on behalf of the safe test law, or they can not lobby. All right. So if the hospital doesn't lobby, it loses its monopoly, and we go to here, right? And our citizens have no cost because we're now getting the baseline. The baseline is to be here, right? So if the hospital doesn't lobby, it has no costs. And if the citizens stay ignorant, they have no gains, no losses. So it's 0 and 0, right? So if the hospital doesn't lobby, then our default position is to be here at 24, and the citizens are getting 24 at 5. So the hospital's making no excess profit, and the citizens aren't losing anything. If the hospital decides to lobby, though, and the citizens stay ignorant, the hospital now gets its monopoly. It gets 36, right? So if the hospital lobbies and it gets its monopoly, and the citizens stay ignorant, then the hospital gets its monopoly. Now, what does the hospital get? Well, it gets 36 minus 5 for lobbying, right? So here's my profits minus my lobbying costs. So it nets out 31, right? So if the hospital lobbies and the people stay ignorant, the hospital gets a net of 31, the 36 profit minus the 5 cost of lobbying. So the hospital gets 31. And if the hospital lobbies and the citizens stay ignorant, the citizens individually lose 225, right? So we go from getting 24 tests at 5 to getting 12 tests at 8, and our consumer surplus falls by 54, but divided by 24, right? So we lose 225, so minus 225. All right, does that make sense? So our base assumption is everybody's getting the starting point is price is set at 5. We're getting 24 units. The hospital's getting no profit. But if the hospital lobbies and the consumers stay ignorant, then the hospital gets its monopoly. It reduces production from 24 to 12, and it gets 36, and the citizens lose all of this consumer surplus, the profit, and then the deadweight loss is created. Right? So we go from having 72 to 54. Excuse me, 72 to 18, or a loss of 54, which is spread over the consumers for a loss of 225 each. All right. However, if the consumers are informed and are able to coordinate, and they all call up their as a result, all call up their representatives, there's a cost of 5 to the consumers, right? There's a cost of 5 to the consumers of doing the lobbying, excuse me, of becoming informed. And then the hospital doesn't get, if the hospital still lobbies, it has to pay for its lobbying, but it doesn't get its profits. So what's the hospital's payoff? Close. So they're spending 5 on lobbying, but the citizens block them. So they still spend 5, but they don't get any profit. So that becomes 0 minus 5, right? They get 0 profit, but they still lobby. So 0 minus 5 is minus 5, right? So you said 5 or minus 5? Oh, you said negative 5? I mean, you're whispering it, so you got to shout it out, you know, otherwise all I heard was 5, or I saw 5. All right. So in this scenario, right, where the consumers are informed, the hospital gets no profits and they still spend money on lobbying. So they wind up with negative 5. And then finally, if the consumers are informed, it still costs them minus 5. And then the hospital doesn't lobby. Well, then the hospital doesn't lose anything because they didn't lobby, but they don't gain anything either. So now we have a game and we can solve the game, right? So let's solve it together. So I like to start again by looking at the outcomes for the top player. So which outcomes go to the top player, the left or the right? Yeah, what? Yes. So if they're informed, the consumers get minus 5 and minus 5, or minus 2.5 or 0. So which is preferred? If the hospital lobbies, would they like to be informed or ignorant? Ignorant, right? And if the hospital doesn't lobby, would they like to be informed or ignorant? Ignorant again. So they have a dominant strategy of being ignorant, right? That's us, we're ignorant. Right? They have a dominant strategy of playing ignorant. How about the hospital? The hospital gets the left points, right? But now we're comparing up down. So if the hospital lobbies and the people are ignorant, they get minus 31. if they're informed, they get -5, or they get 0 and 0. Does the hospital have a dominant strategy? No. Okay. So, but we do know that the consumers have a dominant strategy, and that's to be ignorant, right? So the hospital can now say, we know that the citizens, if they're rational, are not going to spend all their time watching CNN and Fox News and reading the Wall Street Journal and all this other stuff. They're just going to watch their sports ball and NASCAR and whatever else they do. So we don't have to pay attention to this column at all. All we have to do is assume. If we can assume they're going to play ignorant, we get to choose. Do we lobby or not lobby? Well, what are their payoffs? If they lobby, they get 31. And if they don't lobby, they get 0. So given that the citizens have a dominant strategy of being ignorant, the hospital then gets to choose which response to ignorant that they go with. And what they go with is the one that profits them. So the solution is the citizens stay ignorant, the hospital lobbies, and the hospital wins. And so what we wind up with is the monopoly situation where the hospital is able to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost and charge to find their profit maximizing quantity, which is 12. They then set the price at 8, right? Now, the only challenge that the hospitals have to face is some other entrant coming in and saying, I can do that too, right? And so then so what will they do to sustain their monopoly? How much are they willing to spend to sustain their monopoly? We said it earlier, right? How much would they be willing to spend to sustain their monopoly on lobbying? I'll give you a hint, it's more than 5. How much is their monopoly worth to them? It's worth 36, right? The excess profit, the monopoly, what is it worth to them? It's worth the excess profits of 36. Now they're spending 5 already, so they're down to 31. Now Linda shows up in town. She wants to set up a special, testing clinic where it'll be safe for everybody to come get this clinic, because she's going to play into the game too. It's totally not safe for you to get it. It's totally not safe for you to get this test, and take it home and do it on your own. You can come and do it in my special safe testing clinic, right? Where I will oversee your testing. And the hospital's like, oh boy, we're going to have to share our profits with Linda if she's able to get in. How much are they willing to spend to keep Linda out? They're already spending 5. How much more are they willing to spend? How much? 13? Okay, up to 18. Who else got a bet? Thank you. They'd definitely be willing to spend 13 more. They might even be willing to spend more than that. Because if they spend 5 for the initial lobbying and then 13 more, how much profit do they have now? 36 minus 18 is 18. They're making 18 profit. How much more would they be? But Linda's, maybe Linda's got big pockets. She's willing to fight hard. She's got a lot of money going to throw at it because she's like, I can make a lot of money doing this. She's willing to throw a lot of money at it. How much more would the hospital be willing to spend to keep Linda out? Probably not that much. They'd be willing to spend up to 31. Why? Right. So they're already spending. here's one way to look at it. In order to get the initial right, this is their profit. We said it's worth 36. They're currently spending 5 on lobbying, but they have all this left. That's 31. Now Linda's like, hey, I can come in here and do this. You and I both know that what you're doing is complete nonsense and you're not actually doing anything because it's not actually dangerous. So I'm just going to set up a clinic, right, where I administer this test and I'm going to take, at least half of your profits. Well, how much would they be willing to lobby? Well, they'll be willing to pay lobbying fees until they run out of excess profit. So they'd be willing to spend all of their excess profit up to all of their excess profit. If it got up to 36, they'd be done, right? Well, they already spent 5. They'd be willing, as Kayla said, to spend the rest of their excess profit so that they could get away. What they're hoping is they spend maybe 5 more to keep Linda out, and Linda gives up and goes away. And then then they're making 36 minus 10, 26 forever, right? But if Linda turns out to be a tougher cookie than she looks like, right, they'll amp it up to, hey, we'll spend 20. Well, if they spend 20, 36 minus 20 is still 16. That's still better than letting it go to everybody because that goes to 0. So what they're doing is they're willing to spend their excess profit on lobbying in order to keep their monopoly position. So how much is a monopolist willing to spend on lobbying to keep their government granted monopoly? Well, basically all the way up to whatever their profit is. If their profit was 1,000, they'd be willing to spend $9,999.99, right? That would, once they hit 1,000, then they're done. But they'll spend up to their profit to keep their monopoly and keep competitors out. So if I can spend a little more money lobbying government representatives, then I will do that up to the amount of my loss. Excuse me, of my profit. All right. So that's the lobbying game. I haven't mentioned this in class, but hopefully you saw my message. I've got 3 podcasts you can listen to for extra credit. There is a quiz associated with each of them. You can do up to 2 of them for up to 6 points. So each of them has 3 points. Pick the 2 that you find if you'd like the points. Pick the 2 you would find most interesting. The Bruce Yandel one, I love all 3 of them. I think are fabulous. I'm trying to think which one I've got. Bruce Yandel is explicitly on this topic of concentrated benefit and diffuse cost. He calls it bootleggers and Baptists. He's a South Carolina gentleman. He's fabulous. I've met him in person. He's a really nice guy. But he's brilliant. And so you get to listen to this kind of Southern drawl, kind of explaining how this process works. So he's great, worth listening to. Got another guy, Mike Munger, is chair of political science at Duke, and he talks about price gouging, which is he's hilarious as well. At least as far as an economist goes, right? So he's really funny, and he tells some great stories about how price gouging actually works. And I can't think of what the third one is. Anybody looked at them? Oh, Golden Rule. Yes, the Golden Rule. You get to actually listen to the 2 guys that were on the Golden Balls. They're all great. So I mean, so you can listen to the podcast. There is a 3-question multiple choice quiz that goes with each of them. So you can do 2 of them for up to 6 points. And I think the quizzes will all open on Friday. So listen to them between now and then. Listen to those, pick the podcasts you think sound the most interesting. There are links. There should be links on the page.
Right now.
Oh, you can't see the podcasts. Oh, all right. I need to make that available to you. Okay. I meant for you to have access to the podcast, but not are you sure? So this is locked. You can't access this.
Like extra credit, because whatever, like it just is like.
The quiz should be locked, but this, like this, you should be able to click on. That's the link to the podcast. Does anybody what? What? It links to other podcasts? Something that I'm embarrassed of? All right. What does it link to? I gotta see now. But it doesn't appear to be funny.
Wait, see, it just did it. I swear to God.
All right, I'm just gonna check these. Whoop, that's the quiz. No.
This episode archive. Just has
Okay. It should not do that. All right, so Michael Munger, yeah, that's working. I don't know, maybe you're doing something funky over there. All right, they seem to be working to me. So if that's where they are. All right. So that's the lobbying story I wanted to tell you. So I'm going to tell you a little more about this thing called the median voter theorem. So we just had the midterm elections, right? And the way that elections work in the United States is we have a primary and then we have a general election, right? So you have a primary where you're running to be the representative for your particular party. So nominally, Democrats are progressive, Republicans are conservative. That's not really, doesn't appear to be happening in a meaningful way anymore. But let's imagine we've got, we'll call it left and right, because that's our tradition, right? We've got some voters on the left and some voters on the right. The line in the middle is like right in the middle, like you're a centrist voter. And let's imagine that we've got 10 voters. So that's not a voter, that's just a midpoint. Each of these lines represents a voter. And we're in the midterms. Excuse me, we're in the primaries. And I've got a candidate on the left who wants to get elected. I've got two candidates on the left that want to get elected. Let's see if we get pens here. Red, white, and blue. Perfect. All right. So I've got a candidate, two candidates on the left that want to get the votes from the get nominated for to be the representative for the left party. One of the candidates is kind of a centrist candidate. He comes in and his policies are kind of centrist. They're relatively close to the middle. Another candidate comes in and it positions himself farther to the left. So that's Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders is pretty far to the left, about as far to the left as you can get in American politics. Right. So you have, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie. Now, nobody on the right is going to vote for these guys, right? So this is the primary. And then over here, we've got kind of the same setup. We've got somebody who's more centrist. I don't know, help me out with some politicians here. Who's a more centrist guy and maybe a crazy right guy? Marjorie Taylor Greene. Jewish space lasers fame? No. She's a representative from Georgia. She said that one of her famous lines recently was that the wildfires that were happening in California were the result of Jewish space lasers. No shit, look it up. I'm not making that up. This is a real politician in your Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look it up. I'm not kidding. She's a nut. And then we have, I don't know, somebody over here, Mitch McConnell, let's say. That's not good because he's M and she's M. Now, Raphael Warnock, right? Just won the Georgia seat against what's his name, the football player, Herschel Walker, right? Herschel Walker, who's anti-abortion but pays for multiple women to have abortions. Yeah, that guy. You're all looking at me like I'm making this stuff up. I'm not making up any of that. That's all true. Caroline's like, yep, it's true. Caroline's a bit of a political junkie, so I know. She's like, yep. She probably knows more about it than I do. All right. So we've got Raphael Warnock. He's got his issues, but he's not a nut job like Marjorie Taylor Greene is. And over here, we've got Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, who are more local. You guys are, I'm assuming, are aware of them based on the fact that they're both from New England. Okay, so in the primary, nobody on the right is going to vote for in the left primary, right? You can't vote in the Democratic primary if you're a registered Republican. And likewise, you can't vote in the Republican primary if you are a registered Democrat. You have to register in most states. This is not true everywhere. So, but let's say in New Hampshire, it's true. Then you can't vote. You can't vote in the primary because it's really it's the party picking its representative. This is the primary, not the general, right? And so we go from the primary, the parties pick their representatives, and then they present them to the general public in the general election. And then if you're an independent, you get to pick between which one you want. But if you are an independent or you are not registered with the party, you can't vote in the primary because you're not part of the party, right? So on the left, right? Let's focus on the left. In order to the way that voters will vote, assuming they're voting based on their policy preferences, Elizabeth Warren represents a more centrist policy set than Bernie Sanders does. So she's more over to the right than Bernie is. So the people who are closest, the voters who are closest to the politician will vote, or the politician that's closest to the voters will vote for. So who does Elizabeth Warren get? Well, Elizabeth Warren gets this guy, for sure. This guy is like basically in between Elizabeth and Bernie. And so he might go break either way. If there were two of them, we'd split them in, split one this way, one that way. So this one's uncertain. But everybody to the left of Bernie, everybody over here is to the left of Bernie. They'd like Bernie to be even more crazy than he already is, right? But they don't like Elizabeth Warren because she's farther to the right than they are and farther to the right than Bernie. So Bernie gets this guy, and this guy. And this guy could break either way. But at this point, Bernie's got 3 voters. Elizabeth's got 1. So even if this guy broke to Elizabeth, Bernie would still win because he's got 3 voters. Now, over here, we've got Space Laser Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Reverend Warnock. Well, the Reverend Warnock is, right, kind of more centrist than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Well, this guy's going to vote for Warnock. This guy's kind of in between the two of them, right? So he could break either way. And all of these people are like, you're not crazy enough, Marjorie, but you're crazier than Warnock, so we like you. So Marjorie gets 1, 2, 3, Warnock gets 1, and that guy could break either way, but it doesn't matter because Marjorie's already won. So notice who wins. In this election, this primary election, the person closest to the middle wins the primary. In this side, Elizabeth is a little bit to the right to Bernie. Bernie is mostly in the middle. And so he gets everybody to the left of him, and then he splits with Elizabeth, the people on the right, which gives him the win. Over here, right, Marjorie is kind of in the middle, Warnock is to the left, and so she gets everybody to the right of her. He gets whoever's to the left of him, and then whoever's between, they split. That makes sense? So now Bernie becomes the candidate and Marjorie becomes the candidate, and Elizabeth and Warnock are knocked out for the general. Let me redraw this now. Same group of voters. We're going to have, that's the middle, not a voter. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now imagine we've got, how did I do this? We've got Bernie and Marjorie taking up their original stances. If they position themselves as so, who will they get? Right. You've seen this before. Yeah. Poli-sci minor. All right. So Caroline's right. There's nobody to the left of them, of Bernie. So all the people who would like to be to the left of Bernie say, well, Bernie is the least of the evils that we can choose from. For sure, not going to choose space laser green over here, right? So they're going to pick him. These guys are going to all go with they're like, you're not crazy enough, but you're the crazy, you're our kind of crazy. You're not, you're not a socialist. So we'll go with you. What about these folks in the middle? Well, they're going to break to the people who are closest to them, right? So that would be, these two would go to Bernie, these two would go to Marjorie, and we'd have a tie, right? So there's a lot of time between the primary and the general. A lot of time, most of the time. There's some time at least, right? So they win the primary, then they go into the general election, right? So if you remember the presidential election, right? We went through this whole kind of crazy Democratic primary until Biden kind of came out on top, and then from there on out, all the candidates stepped back and threw their hats and threw their support behind Biden to run against Trump. So then it became, for the general election for the national, it was who could convince most of the voters. So imagine, right? We had, we could substitute this with Biden and Trump, right? In, actual election that happened. Biden's a left-leaning. He's a centrist, and I don't know what to say about Trump. I'm sorry. I don't mean to insult anybody. It's hard to kind of peg down where Trump actually falls in because he's so kind of unique, let's say. That's a nice way of saying it. He's unique. So as this stands, it'll be a tie. No, we can't have ties, but as it stands, it'll be tie. So if you're the campaign manager for one of these two characters, what are you going to tell them to do with their messaging? Right now, where I've drawn the lines, that's their public statements about their policy. You're evaluating, should we make a change to what we're saying to the public? All right, Caroline. Yeah, they're right. Bernie doesn't, in our example here, Bernie doesn't really need to do anything to get the guys to the left of him. What he needs to do is get somehow get one more person over here to vote for him. So if he were to, and I can't imagine Bernie actually doing this, but if he were to shift his position and start making some arguments like, you know, maybe we shouldn't socialize medicine after all. Maybe we, maybe, you know, I don't know. Maybe he makes some changes to a platform that makes it a little bit more conservative. And he pulls himself, so he starts making an argument that that shows him as being a little more of a little more conservative. He's like, I said all that stuff when I was young, when I was in my 70s. But now I've come around to your perspective. And so he starts arguing here, and Marjorie stays right there. And she's just like, space lasers, what's going to happen? Well, since we're out of time, what's going to happen is he's now here. She's still over here. These two people will still vote for him, right? Because they're closer to him than they are to her. This person will now vote for him because he's closer to their beliefs. This person might break to her, but it doesn't matter because he now has 5 + 1 is 6 versus 4, and he'll win. So the takeaway for that, this is called the median voter theorem. It's a poli-sci thing. And what I'm showing here is an equal distribution, spaced equally. You could also have them spaced not equally. Your book does that. The median voter theorem says in the primaries we'll play to our base, but in the general, there's an incentive for candidates to move more closer to the center because it'll attract, you're fighting for the people in the center. So whoever gets closest to the center winds up winning the election, right? So what you'll see typically, what you would predict to see as a result of this model is in the general election, we will see the candidates tend to moderate their statements, a little less space lasers, a little less communism for everybody, and a little more of kind of just normal talking. All right, so that's it for us. So that's what we'll have on the exam. Tina, thank you. We'll see you. I got to keep all these guys here and talk to them. So I'm going to let you go. No, I got to talk to these guys about something else. So everybody say bye, Tina. Bye, Tina. All right, I will not keep you long. All right, couple of things. So, I'm going to require this book for next semester. It is called The Unspoken Rules by Gorick. No, I think is how you say it. I'll write it down. You can get it off Amazon. It's like $10. Gorick? No, I think that's how you say it. It's NG. Gorick, no. It is a very good book. The entire book is about making the transition to the workforce. So it's he's very easy to read. I recommend you get it and start reading it over break. I'll assign about half of it for reading through class, but this is probably the best book that I could recommend to you as you get ready to enter the professional workforce. Easy to read, full of like tips about how to talk to your boss, how to talk to your coworkers, what to dress, how to dress, all this kind of stuff. How to deal with workplace conflict is it's just like very practical. So it's cheap. I'm going to make you read it anyway, so you may as well get it. Put it on your Christmas list, Hanukkah list, whatever it is. Have your parents buy it for you, or it's like $15, something like it's cheap. So we're going to read that next semester. So go ahead and get it now. Once I get through this week, I will be reaching out, and over the next couple of weeks, I will be reaching out to all the sites that are on the list that I've shared with you, and then some more probably, to kind of finalize how do you want to do application process, and I will be updating that. So I want you to make sure that you are paying attention to that list over break. I will be periodically, if something pops up like, hey, this person wants to have your application in by January 5th or something, I will be emailing you. So I know you all are not like, you're more on, Snapchat and stuff like that. And I know like my daughter's like, I don't read my email. So you're dealing with the olds. You need to be paying attention to your email over break. Okay. So keep your UNH email, be checking it on a regular basis, because I will be emailing you updates and as things kind of come up. Okay. Because that's how I'm going to communicate with you. So don't ignore your email. And then finally, I'll be scheduling calls. I will schedule some calls, kind of what I'll probably do is offer some small group calls to strategize with you over break. Like as you start to think about what do you want to do, if you want. If you come back from break and you don't have an internship, it's okay. Most people are not going to have an internship until probably March, right? My goal is to have you all, if I can make it happen, my goal would be to have all of you placed by April 1st. So I will offer some time over break where we can do some calls and talk about, what is it you're looking at? What do you want to work on? If you have any questions, right? So I'll make that available to you. Okay. So again, pay attention to your email. If you want to schedule something with me independently, that's fine. I'm going to be available and available to talk with you about what you want to do. All right. Yeah, over break. I mean, next week I want you focused on your exams. I don't want you stressing about this. Remember, our first application is going to be Exeter Hospital. Really great opportunity. He takes 2 interns, provides a great experience. So if you're going to be in Durham, you ought to apply to it, but that's due, your cover letter and resume are due to me by December 31st, because then I'm going to pack them all up and send them to him as a block. All right. That's really it. I will hang out here for those of you that have questions about finance. So I changed the finance makeup to Friday morning because of space issues. If you cannot do that, come see me and I can see about try to accommodate you. Yeah, he wants like mid-January, I think so.
Yeah.
All right, I see it. Hey, have you heard anything back from?
Not at all. And Pastor J